Well, once upon a time, a long time ago in a faraway land, there lived a village of people alongside a big lake. And at the edge of the lake was their village, and rising behind the village was a big hill. And on top of the hill was a huge, enormous, dark castle. And inside the castle lived a giant whose name was Oxford. Now, the people living in the village down at the edge of the lake were very, very poor, and they didn't have money to buy presents and stuff for kids' birthdays. So every year they celebrated all the kids' birthdays on one day in the spring, about this time of year, maybe a little bit later. Now, what would happen is the moms would all start baking, and they would bake chocolate chip cookies, peanut butter cookies. They would bake glazed donuts and donuts with white powder on the outside and donuts with chocolate covering the outside. They would make apple pies and blueberry pies and pumpkin pies, and they would make all kinds of muffins and cupcakes with white icing and cupcakes with chocolate icing and cupcakes with strawberry icing. Well, on the day of the birthday, they would put all the food on picnic tables down the middle of the village. Now, the village was two lines of cabins with a street in between, just made out of dirt. And they would set the picnic tables up and pile them high with all the stuff. And then every family would get together at 2 o'clock and eat a lot of good stuff. Most of the kids didn't eat breakfast or lunch that day because they looked forward to the party a lot. Well, it was the day of the party, and everybody was starting to get ready, and the food was piled on the tables, when up at the top of the hill, the doors of the castle opened with a big clang, and out stepped Oxford. Now, Oxford stood about 9 feet tall. That's taller than any room you're standing in. And he had dark hair and a big dark beard and dark mean eyes. And he wore dark shirts and dark pants and big huge boots. And he looked down at the village, and then he started down the path to the village. Clump, clump, clump. Well, someone down below saw him coming and yelled, "Oxford's coming! Oxford's coming! Go hide, hide!" And all the people and all the kids ran into their houses, and they hid under the beds, and they hid in closets, and they hid everywhere they could find to hide. No one was left outside. Oxford got down to the village, and he looked down that length of tables with all that stuff, and he said, "That's going to be a good supper for me." And he started grabbing all the stuff and putting it in the big, huge pockets of his coat, one table after another. Now, out in the forest, there was a brother and sister who had been gathering wood. Their mom and dad had gotten very sick and died, and the people of the village took care of them. And the way it worked was that the kids would go out and get wood for the stoves, and whoever's stove they got wood for would give them supper and give them a place to spend the night. And the sister was about 6, and the brother was about 7. And they came into the village carrying a big stack of sticks on each of their shoulders. And as they got into the village, the brother suddenly shoved the sister behind a house, and she said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And he said, "Oxford's in the village, and he's taking all the stuff for the kid's birthday party." And she said, "He can't do that." And before her brother could stop her, she ran out, and she ran up to Oxford, and she looked way up into his face, and she said, "Oxford, you can't do that. That food is for the kid's birthday party once a year. You can't take it." And Oxford looked down at her with a mean voice and a smile, and he said, "Oh, yeah? I think I'll just take you, too." And he grabbed her and shoved her into one of the big pockets of his coat. And he turned around and went back out of the village and up the hill to the castle. Column, column, clang! The big doors of the castle slammed shut. Well, the brother was crying and crying, and he ran around to the village and tried to get people to help him. "Oxford's taken my sister, he's taken my sister. You've got to help me." But all the people were too scared of Oxford to do anything. And he couldn't get anybody to help him. Finally, someone said, "You ought to go out into the forest to the little lady who lives in a cabin. She knows a lot of stuff, and she might be able to help you." And so, crying and crying, he went out into the forest, and he found the little cabin in the forest, and he went up and knocked on the door, and he was crying, and the door opened, and there was a little old lady with gray hair and a blue dress and a white apron. And she looked at him and she said, "What is the problem? You come right in. I have to give you a piece of apple pie and a glass of milk." And he came right in and sat down and ate his apple pie and glass of milk, and he told the little lady everything that had happened. Well, she said, "Here's what you need to do. Go out into the forest and call for the little people, and the little people will know how to help you." So that afternoon, the boy left the house, and he went out into the forest, and he called, "Little people, little people, where are you? Little people, where are you?" Nothing. No one came. And after a while, he started to cry again because he wasn't getting any help. And finally, he lay down in a grassy spot in the forest, and he cried and cried, and then he went to sleep for a few minutes. And when he opened his eyes, his head was on the side, looking at a rock which is just in front of him, a little bit away from him. It was a flat rock. And he opened his eyes, and standing on the rock was a little man that tall. And he had on brown boots that came up to his knees, blue pants, a leather belt around his waist, and a red shirt. And he had a long gray beard that went all the way down from his chin and tucked into his belt at his waist. And he had a funny, tall gray hat. And he looked, and in kind of a squeaky voice, he looked at the boy who was now sitting up on the grass, and he said, "I hear you've been calling for the little people. What's the trouble?" And the boy told him everything that had happened. And the little man said, Oxford's been up to his old tricks, has he? So hold out your hand." And the boy held out his hand, and the little man climbed right onto his hand, and he said, "Now, put me up against your pocket, against your shirt pocket." And so the boy held him up to his shirt pocket, and the little man was just the right size to climb down in his shirt pocket and look up over the top of the shirt pocket and see where they were going. And he said, "Now, back to the village." And so they walked through the forest and back to the village, and it was getting to be late afternoon. And when they got to the village, the little man said, "Now, up to the castle." And the boy said, "Up to the castle? I'm just a little kid. Oxford's a giant. I'm just a little kid. I can't go up to the castle." And the little man said, "It's going to be all right. Just go up to the castle." And so the boy was really scared. But he climbed the path all the way up to the castle. And he stood in front of the two huge doors in front of him. And the little man said, "Open the doors." And he said, "I'm just a little kid. Those doors are huge. They're giant doors. There's two of them. They're way too big for me. I can't do anything." And the little man said, "Just put your hand out and push on the door." And the boy reached his hand out and pushed on the door. And the door swung open, inside, opening up the entrance to the castle. And the boy was looking down a long hall. And at the end of the hall was a big room. And in the middle of the room was a huge giant's dining room table. And at one end of the table sat Oxford in a huge giant's chair. And in front of him was all the pies and cupcakes and donuts and cookies and everything for the kid's birthday party. And then at the side of the table, right in front of him, was a huge bird cage, big enough for somebody to stand inside. And inside it was his sister holding on to the railings of the bird cage and crying and crying and crying. Well, the little man said, "March right down there and tell Oxford you want all the stuff back and you want your sister back." The boy said, "I'm just a little kid." And the man said, "It's okay. Just go and do it." So down the long hall walked the boy, all the way into the room. And he walked up to the table, and he looked up at Oxford, and he said, "Oxford, I want my sister back, and I want all the stuff back for the kids' party. You don't get it. It belongs to all the kids." And Oxford looked down at him with a mean smile, and he said, "Oh, yeah? I think I'm just going to take you, too." And he reached down his hand to grab the boy. And just as he did, the little man pulled out of his pocket a little leather sack, and he opened it and dumped some blue dust out into the air. And outside the front of the castle, there was a loud crack, and Oxford looked down the hall, and his eyes got big, big, big around, and he said, "Don't you come in here. You stay away from me. Don't you come in here." And the boy turned around and looked down the hall, And there, standing in the door of the castle, was a huge, enormous, gigantic lion. And the lion went roar and jumped into the castle and started running down the hall as fast as he could. And Oxford said, stay away from me. He jumped up, he knocked over his chair, stay away from me. Oxford ran across the room and ran right through a window out and fell out of the castle down onto the ground below. And the lion came right through the room and jumped through the window down onto the ground after Oxford. And the boy ran to the window, and Oxford was running down the hill as fast as he could, running, stay away from me, don't you come near me, stay away from me. And the lion was chasing him, roar, roar. And Oxford got down to the lake, and he jumped in and started swimming, yelling, stay away from me. The lion came right after him and jumped in the water and started swimming after him, going, roar, roar. And they swam across the lake farther and farther away. And when they got to the far side of the lake, the boy could just hear Oxford saying, stay away from me, stay away from me. And the lion, roar, roar, roar. And Oxford climbed out of the lake and ran into the forest, and the lion was right behind him. Well, the little man said, I think it's time to get all the stuff together and go down and have the kid's birthday party. So they got his sister out of the birdcage, and people came and helped them, and they got all the stuff back down to the village and onto the tables, and they had a huge party. Well, it turned out that the brother and sister found out the little man loved apple pie. And they would bring him a little teeny tiny plate of apple pie and a little teeny tiny fork. And he would eat the apple pie. And they would say, would you like some more? And he would say, burp, don't mind if I do. And they'd bring him some more. And every time he finished, they'd ask him if he'd like more. And he'd say, burp, don't mind if I do. Well, finally his little tummy was sticking so far out, they thought that his belt was going to break. And everybody had finished all the food. So it came time to take the little man out to the forest. And the brother and sister, brother put him in his pocket, and the brother and sister took him out to the forest. And there, right outside the village, was another round, flat rock down at the bottom of a tree. And the boy put his hand down, the little man climbed out of his hand onto the rock. And the brother and sister said, we can't thank you enough. You saved the party, and you saved my sister. That is the most wonderful thing. Thank you so much. Is there anything we can do for you? And the little man said, well, brr, you know I love apple pie. So when they looked at each other and smiled, they looked back down at the rock. He was gone, just like that. Well, after that, every morning, they would bring a little teeny tiny apple pie out to that rock. And when they came back, a few hours later, there was nothing but crumbs left. And every once in a while, they thought they could hear burp. And that is the end of the story.